Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle waited until tonight in his hometown of Pittsburgh to make the announcement that he will be wrestling his farewell match at WrestleMania this year. He said nothing about his potential opponent. He will apparently tell us, supposedly, we'll see, who his opponent is going to be tomorrow night. And then he wrestled his final match ever in Pittsburgh. He beat Apollo Crews with an Angle Slam. That must have been cool for Apollo to be part of one of Kurt Angle's final matches, his last match ever in his hometown. You know, it's sad to see injuries and father time catch up with Kurt, because Kurt Angle is absolutely, I don't care what anybody says, Kurt Angle is one of the best of all time. I mean, think about what you look for in a professional wrestler. Ideally, you want them to be able to wrestle. I think that's kind of important. That might not be as important to some people. I still think that's kind of important. You want to look competent in the ring. You want to be able to do things in the ring that other people can't do. You want to be able to be in the ring for 15, 20, 30 minutes at a time and not bore people to death. I don't ever remember being bored by a Kurt Angle match. I was fearful for his life sometimes, some of the things that he did, especially even in TNA. He was still doing moonsaults off steel cages, the crazy man that he is. So the wrestling thing came easy to him, right? We never had to worry about that, given his background. But his background gave him legitimacy that very few other people had. He was a gold medal winner in the Olympic Games. Now, he incorporated that into his gimmick, because there was never a gold medal winner in WWE before he came along, in wrestling anyway. So it just added to his credibility. But on top of that, he can play any role you want him to play. So when you think of pro wrestling, it's not just wrestling. You have to have a personality. You have to have charisma. You have to be able to speak. And he could do it all. He checked all of those boxes. You wanted serious Kurt Angle? Go watch Kurt Angle in 2003 or 2006 when they sent him to ECW and he had the mouthpiece. He looked like the biggest badass in the world. You want him to be funny? He could do that too. One of the most entertaining characters in the history of this company was that goofy Kurt Angle that we saw back in 2000 when he first debuted. And what a year he had in 2000. One of the best rookie years in WWE history. They gave him the European title. They gave him the Intercontinental title. He won the King of the Ring. He won the WWF title. He wrestled all the top guys. That's a hell of a first year. Him and Brock both. Two best first years in company history. So he could be the straight man. He could be the funny man. And I look at this guy's body of work, and I'm not going to sit here and say a number one. I'd have to think long and hard about that. But he's in the conversation. He has to be. He didn't have the longevity of a Ric Flair. He didn't have the longevity of a Hulk Hogan. But neither did Steve Austin. Neither did The Rock. When you really look at their careers, especially when they were at their peak, they didn't wrestle for that long. They didn't have a long stretch at the very top. It was actually, especially in Austin's case, it was actually very short. You know, he had all those years in WCW, as Stunning Steve and the Hollywood Blonde stuff, but I'm talking at his peak as a single star. You want to chart it, let's say, from the end of 96, when he engaged in that feud with Bret Hart, straight through until he had to retire. It's not really that long, and there was a big gap in the middle because of the neck injury and some other injuries. But I don't know anybody who wouldn't put Stone Cold Steve Austin at or near the top of their list of top stars in company history. Kurt Angle has to be in that conversation. Not everybody can just switch on a dime like that, like the flip of a switch, from serious to funny and funny back to serious, the way that Kurt Angle could do. He was very versatile in that way. I've said that about Kane. Kane is another one. Kane was not the kind of wrestler that Kurt Angle was, but as a character, Kane is one of the all-time great characters in WWF history. That especially those early years with the original mask and, you know, the whole package. But Kane could do the serious monster stuff, or he could be, you know, he could be the funny guy. He was in the ring doing spinneroonies at one point, talking about Canaanites. You know, whatever you need the guy to do. And then later on, he was wearing a suit and tie, Libertarian Kane. There's been so many versions of Kane over the years. Why do you think they kept him around for so long and he was always on television, even when you didn't want him to be? He could fill any kind of hole, any kind of role they needed him to play. Other people went down. He didn't get hurt that often. Kurt got hurt a lot. Kane, I never heard about Kane being hurt that often. So you could always plug him in when you needed him. Oh, we need you to do this. Okay, fine. Let's have Kane do this. Let's have Kane do that. Kurt was the same way. Whatever you needed him to do. He wasn't a one-dimensional guy. Now, he's a shell of what he used to be. But I am looking forward more to his WrestleMania match than I think most. I'm looking forward to the Kofi stuff. I'm looking forward still kind of to the women's stuff. They've kind of botched that a little bit. But the Kurt Angle match, not that I expect a 5-star classic here, but I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be, I think, a pretty emotional thing when the match is over, whether he wins or loses, and everybody stands up and gives him the big ovation, and everybody gives him the big send-off. And I do believe, I mean, I know it's wrestling, right? We all thought Shawn Michaels was retired, and then he came back in Saudi Arabia, so never say never. But, you know, I think that this probably is it for Kurt. I think he probably realizes that his body just can't go anymore, and this is it. So it's going to be a pretty emotional thing. The question is, who does he wrestle in his final match? As much as I would still like to see John Cena against Samoa Joe, it is the match that they seemed to kind of be teasing a couple of weeks ago, and I've said I would love it for it to be Joe and Cena and play off the history. They came up together out on the West Coast. This thing is screaming out for a television program or like a big WrestleMania match where they can maybe even get some of that early footage and put it in the video. Like it just screams out for that. As much as I would like to see that match at WrestleMania, John Cena as Kurt Angle's final opponent when Kurt was Cena's very first opponent on television would be a fitting end. I think the most fitting end to Kurt's career. And I think it would be a nice full circle story for John Cena. And as Jacob pointed out to me in an email, I didn't realize this, but Jacob emailed me. He said, Raw tomorrow night, it's at the Allstate Arena. That happens to be the very same building where John Cena made his debut on SmackDown in 2002 when he challenged Kurt Angle to a match. So it would be fitting for Cena to show up on TV tomorrow night and either challenge Kurt, or not even challenge him, just say, Kurt, it would be an honor, you know, for me to be your final opponent, or maybe turn the tables and have Kurt interrupt Cena and say, I choose you. Just like Ric Flair chose Shawn Michaels in that storyline, right? He wanted Shawn to be his final opponent. Maybe they do something similar where Kurt says, John, I want you to be my final opponent. I want you to be the last person that I wrestle. It would be an honor. It's too good of a story to pass up. And I know, and I already had people online saying, well, that's stupid. It doesn't benefit anybody. Why wouldn't you put a young guy? Why wouldn't you put a new face in there? They could get the rub. You know how many times we hear this? And in a lot of situations, in most situations, I probably would agree that if you can take somebody with a name like a Kurt Angle and use them in a way to get somebody else over, that's always ideal. And you could certainly find one if you want to. You could look for a newer guy and, you know, Kurt can put them over and all that, unless it's a babyface, you know, and then they win. Then I really don't see the point. They could do Baron Corbin and they could have the battle of the former GMs. He has history with Angle. It would be somebody Kurt could beat, so he wins in his retirement match. But I really don't want to see Baron Corbin as Kurt Angle's final opponent. That's like a really good television show that used to be great. Still pretty good, but it's not as good as it used to be. All of a sudden gets canceled mid-season before the writers have a chance to give it the ending that it deserves. I don't want to see Baron Corbin as Kurt Angle's final opponent. Drew McIntyre, he looks to be accounted for now for WrestleMania. It probably is going to be Drew and Roman Reigns. And he already has a win over Kurt. Unless they wanted to come back to that and you know, mention the fact that not only did Drew beat Kurt Angle on TV months ago, but he embarrassed him. It was an embarrassing loss. It was a one-sided, lopsided, embarrassing loss. And the story then could be that Kurt is looking for redemption and has either just a better showing but still falls short, or maybe finds a way to win. You know, maybe Roman Reigns doesn't even wrestle. Maybe Roman interferes and he costs Drew the match, and that's how Kurt wins. I think that would suck. I don't want to see that. First of all, I'm sure Roman Reigns is going to be doing more than just, you know, doing a run-in. And I don't need to see somebody interfering to give Kurt a cheap win. That's not how I would do it. So I think Drew is out of the picture. I think he's accounted for. I think that he's got his thing with the Shield. And also, let's be honest here, Kurt Angle, if it was a straight up match at this stage, beating Drew McIntyre as dominant as they made him look last week, would be ridiculous. I think you go in this case with another vet. I'm not buying into the whole, you got to go with a young guy, give the rub, give the rub. There's not much of a rub left to give in Kurt's current state. This is not the Kurt Angle of old. How impressive is it really if somebody beats Kurt Angle? Everybody else has already done it. He's had a bunch of losses on TV. I think he even lost to Baron Corbin on TV. So I'm not even sure how much of a, quote, rub there is for anybody at this point. Chad Gable against Kurt Angle is a match that I would have killed to see. You guys know I'm a big proponent of Chad Gable. Would I love to see Kurt Angle against Chad Gable? Of course I would. I'd love to see the Kurt Angle of old against Chad Gable more than the current one. But I think it would be even cool to see the current Kurt Angle against Chad Gable. But that ship has sailed. We're now going into Kurt's final match. Time ran out. To take Chad Gable out of a tag team. He's doing the tag team thing now with Bobby Roode. He has nothing to do with Kurt Angle. He has no connection to Kurt Angle. Had they gone with him in that stupid storyline, then they would have probably a great WrestleMania match on the table. And Jason Jordan, it sounds like his career may be over. Even if he comes back, he's not going to be back in time for WrestleMania, so he's not an option. I don't want Chad Gable just shoehorned in there because, I think it would be a great match. It has to make sense. This is Kurt's final match. This is not time to just, pop the names in a randomizer and pick the one young guy's name who comes out. I don't want to see that. This is not the time to worry about young guys and giving them a boost and giving them a rub. I want an opponent that is fitting, that makes sense for Kurt Angle's final match. There's only one name for that, and that name is John Cena. I would make the call more than Cena Joe to go with Cena against Kurt. And if Kurt's body wasn't beaten to shit, I would say Brock Lesnar, so that we get one more Angle-Lesnar match. But that ship also sailed a very long time ago. I think Brock is probably the worst opponent that Kurt Angle could have at this stage. It should be John Cena.